Hi, I'm Clara, and this is the Practice with Clara podcast, where we go into philosophy and all things yoga related, which has been my passion for the last 20 years. This week's episode is all about the second chakra. We go into the themes, prenatal, postnatal yoga, and one of the oldest philosophies of India known as Tantra. If you haven't already, subscribed to the podcast, and I hope you enjoy today's episode.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Practice with Clara podcast. You're sitting with Stephanie.
I'm Clara.
For today's episode on the second chakra. So for the full series on the chakras, so 7 weeks total, we're working from the book Wheels of Life, which was recommended in one of our teacher trainings by Clara.
And the author is Anodea Judith.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm going to start each of the series with a quote to kind of ground and land in the idea and the essence that Anodea Judith is presenting for the chakra. You are water, the essence of all forms, yet formless. You are the point from which each direction flows, and you are the flow. You are the one that feels. You are the one that moves. You are the one that embraces the other.
Can you read it again?
Mm-hmm.
And if you haven't already, I'd really recommend closing your eyes, those of us who are receiving and just listening.
You are water, the essence of all forms, yet formless. You are the point which each direction flows, and you are the flow. You are the one that feels. You are the one that moves. You are the one that embraces the other.
So what do you think?
I feel this captures the essence of this chakra in the idea of water. So that's the element for this space. The coming together with the other, the fluidity, the dynamic force, and the multi-directions. I feel like the second chakra really brings you into this, well, it's the creative space, and it's moving and all pervading and going outward, whereas root chakra, where we began last week, is one point. It's singular, it's grounded, it's the center, and now we're coming up, and there's a little bit more expression and flow.
And the second chakra, I don't think we talked about this last week. The first chakra is Muladhara, second chakra is Svadhisthana, and that's the names in Sanskrit. And then, as Steph just said, the element is water. All of the chakras have an element that goes with them. So the element is water. And then generally it deals with our emotions and our sexuality, our creativity, and all of that, because this is literally where our sexual fluids are and our genitals are, which is the way that we create or procreate. And so this is the space where we connect to our fluidity, going with the flow, as Steph was just saying. And so when we deal with or work with the second chakra, we're working with our emotions. They say it's also the place where we hold our how we relate to others. This is where Steph was saying, like, the one pointed is the root chakra, and the second chakra is now we come in contact with the world, or where our relationships with the people around us. And our creativity, this is where the creativity lives. And so we tap into this chakra when we want to be inspired, would be one of the biggest ones that I would say, when we want to work with our relationship, not only to our bodies, but to the people in our lives. And then, how we express our emotions, what they feel like, how they feel specifically, not express into the world, but through ourselves.
And just to add to that, I think another big factor of this space is that flow and change and letting go and flowing. And last week, we went for a bike ride to Squamish, and it stopped somewhere, and there was a waterfall coming down the mountain. And I am more relate to earth. I'm an earth sign, so I'm very grounded. And watching the water, and I've had this before, watching moving rivers, any moving current, where I almost start to feel anxious because there's nothing to hold on to. The water's moving so quickly. And what I was thinking is, none of those droplets are ever going to pass the same piece of land again. It goes by, and then it's gone. And that's evolution. That's what we're dealing with moment to moment. And when I really start to think about that and try to kind of grab onto something, well, there's nothing to hold on to. And that's where I start feeling anxious.
Interesting. I get very, it's very freeing for me.
Yeah, but you're more of an air expressive
Watery,
fluid.
yes.
So
Yeah, so that's interesting. I've never thought of it that way, that every droplet will never meet this piece of earth again. What a beautiful and scary concept.
yeah, to me it's eloquent, but it's terrible. Like I even right now, it kind of fills me with this simmering, like yeah.
Where I'm like, wow, that's so cool. Like every moment's going to be different. I love that idea. I love that idea. And then, yeah, so going with the flow. And so moving out of like, there's a rigidity in earth, there's a heaviness and like a stableness is what. And so moving with second chakra. So if you're ever feeling like you're having a hard time letting go, then this would be the chakra that you generally are working with. And creating like fluid movements in your practice, or doing Tai Chi would be another great one, or any kind of, fluid movement, dancing, a martial art that has more of like Qigong would be another one. Those would be great ones to kind of check in with, to be able to connect to that fluidity. But you do like fluid movement. I would say that. Like, I feel like when we're teaching a class and there's a lot of fluidity, there's a freedom for you. I see it in you.
Yes, but that's because I'm aware of how bonded I am to earth. So it's similar to the like attracts like opposite heals. And I feel like this theme's going to keep repeating itself because you're striving to serve with the opposite.
Yes.
And I'm aware of this, which is why I think my teachers, my practices, the things I seek, I do try to look for the opposite. And I need the flow, the fluidity. That's also why I love cycling, is because the momentum, and I can feel the wind. It's the same kind of freedom that I get through water, whereas someone who is moving upwards, you're going to want to move down and ground.
Yes.
But yeah, I do like
Yes.
flowy practices.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so maybe introduce to our listeners Prana Flow by Shiva Rea.
The style of yoga. Yeah. So this is a style of vinyasa yoga that my teacher Shiva Rea created. And I've studied off and on with her since 2003. And this is a movement. This is born out of a lot of different... This is born out of her creativity of playing with different styles of dance as well as yoga, and just being in her own body and allowing her own body wisdom to move. And she realized that there was so much power in fluidity. Actually, one of her DVDs is actually called Fluid Power, and I've got a class named after that, inspired by my teacher. And so Prana Flow, she deals with a lot of what she calls moving meditations. So you start every single class with the moving meditation, and we're going to be doing actually moving meditations for a lot of the rituals for the chakras in the coming weeks. And the idea of that is to remind ourselves of this flow that is naturally moving through us, since we're made up of at least 75% water. You know, one of her big things is she's like, we walk around thinking that we're a solid, even though we're actually mostly liquid. And so connecting to that liquidity reminds us of our natural state, and generally that's very healing for most people. And so I remember when I met Shiva in 2003, I felt like I had come home again, because here was a woman that was creating movements that I'd been naturally doing actually on the dance floor in the nightclubs of New York City, and in a different setting. And I was like, oh yeah, like this is how I feel naturally. Like this is the way that I want to move. So a lot of moving meditation. So how she starts most classes, I'll just give an example, is like the hands would start in prayer, and then you'd inhale and widen the hands out to the side, and exhale, bring them in. And you would just do this kind of connecting to the natural contraction and release of your breath, but also the fluidity of your body and of the breath itself. So even though breath is of the air element, it does have a fluidity like water.
And that teaches us like how to come into situations with others, because one of the themes of this chakra is the partnering,
the relationship.
Yeah, meeting others. And when you are stuck in your own kind of frame of thought or way of doing things, when you come into other spaces with other people, you're less receptive to what they're sharing and making that experience together. So this chakra, I think, really illuminates the surrender to the experience and partnering, coming together with another, because it's beautiful what we can create together.
Co-create, yes.
Co-create.
Yes.
And usually, at least in my experience, it's my own limitations and way of thinking that inhibit me from meeting that space.
And it's a beautiful how self-aware you are around that. It's like, so that's a beautiful thing to kind of reflect in ourselves, is when we meet other, because we're going to talk more about Tantra later, but like in the tantric philosophy, right, the greatest sadhana, the greatest practice is that of being with other, because it's when we are with another person that we're kind of pressed up against our own like you said, our solidity, but our own comfort levels. Like we only go so far. When we're by ourselves, we can hang out in our comfort zone because there's nobody there to kind of take us out of it. And so when we meet another, coming back to it, is like when you start to feel friction with someone else, right? You're coming up against literally your comfort border. And so when you come up against it, it's generally with somebody else, and maybe they're doing something that you do differently, or they think differently, or whatever it is. It's an opportunity to be like, can I, as Steph said, surrender into this and soften and kind of be able to explore and feel this, the end of my comfort zone, right? And be like, what's happening over here? And what is coming up, what is bubbling up, right, in myself, that this other person is reflecting back to me, which is like such a gift, and can be also really annoying at the same time, depending upon whether or not you're open in that moment to growing.
I'm rewatching Transparent.
Okay.
It's so good. With
Yes.
Jeffrey Tambor.
Yes.
In the episode I watched last night, such a great statement. There's this issue between two women, and the one woman looks at the other and goes, I'm sorry if my boundary is becoming your trigger. Because the one woman is just reacting to everything that's going on. And that relates to what you're saying, and how we're co-creating the environment, what's happening when you're coming together with someone. And one of the women is so self-aware because she recognizes my actions right now are really affecting this person. And the other girl didn't get it. It's so funny.
Yeah. And then what to do, like to me, this is like all the work that we do, at least for me on the mat, all the work that we do on the mat or the meditation cushion is so that I'm more self-aware when I come in relationship with others. And so to the best of my ability, right, like when we are triggered, when I am triggered by somebody else, it's like, ooh, okay, this is something for me to observe and kind of look at and like take note of, to either work with in this moment or to work with later on by myself.
And you said recently in our community Facebook group, I forget what the question was, and your answer surprised me, because you said, and I'm going to paraphrase, correct me if I'm wrong, talking to strangers makes me uncomfortable.
Yes.
Which is where teaching, and I think you said traveling, has been really great learning opportunities for me.
Yeah, the question was where do you take yourself out of your own environment or out of your own comfort zone?
Right.
And how does that happen? And definitely talking to strangers makes me really uncomfortable. But I try to do it often because I think it's really important for me. And so the gift of teaching yoga is I talk to strangers all the time until they become friends. And then
I would have never guessed that of you, but very interesting.
Yeah, I'm an extrovert introvert. So I can do stuff extroverted, but I'm actually really introverted. So so that is a great and meeting people who don't know who I am or I don't have a relationship with can make me uncomfortable because I don't know how we're going to relate to each other, and I'm also really sensitive to how people are feeling. So that also adds like an extra layer to it.
And that is another theme that this chapter brings out, is the clairvoyance or empath and the sensitivities of this chakra. So when we become more aware of how we feel and our emotions and everything's coming up, then there's that kind of defining point of when you're coming into another space with another person. And we've talked about this before, and you said owning what is mine and leaving what is yours. And sometimes those are murky waters.
Yeah, and that's where the whole idea of boundaries, this is, I feel like, also the second chakra is also how we create boundaries in relationship, right? And so, being like, this is where I'm comfortable and I don't want to go past this point, or maybe I will explore going out of my comfort zone depending upon what's happening in the situation.
So let's talk a little bit more about your style of teaching. And specifically, I wanted to bring up the prenatal and postnatal series that are offered on the Practice with Clara platform, just because I feel that they translate into an everyday practice. I do them myself, but also because of the second chakra is the womb. So we're right in that area where you're carrying baby. So breaking this down, maybe first let's talk about prenatal yoga when you're expecting. What are some of the poses that you don't want to be doing in your practice?
This is a bit of a controversial topic because it actually depends on the school of thought in terms of prenatal. I did my prenatal training with Shiva, but I've had other friends who are also prenatal certified who come from different schools of thought. So I'm just going to start off by saying that what I'm saying is only one school of thought, and you'll read all kinds of things on the internet, especially those of us who are expecting. And so before I even go into this, the first thing I'll say for anybody who is expecting, meaning who is pregnant, is really listen to your body. Every pregnancy is so different. Every woman is so different. And so the biggest teacher or the biggest signifier of whether or not something works is your body itself. And it'll tell you, usually pretty strongly right away. So that's that. We'll start there. And so depending upon which trimester you're in, you can do some things versus other things. And again, this is a very broad generalization. Every woman is so different. I actually was pregnant. Two of my friends were pregnant at the same time I was, a couple weeks apart. And all of us, like, it was fun. One time we all went to a yoga class together, and all three women looked so different in their practices because we were all having a very different pregnancy. So that was so cool to observe.
That'd be interesting.
I mean, I teach prenatal yoga, so I see it, but it was fun to do it with my other two friends were also yoga teachers, so also very self-aware. So cool to see how we all did things very differently. So for me, in my first trimester, I was actually pretty nauseous until my third trimester. So putting my head below my heart was really hard. Standing forward fold, downward dog, things like that. I could barely do them because I'd almost start dry heaving, which is super not fun. So so if you try any of the prenatal classes, especially in the first and second trimester, you'll notice that I'll have standing forward fold, instead of having my hands on the ground or on blocks, which would be classic ways of doing it for regular people as well as pregnant people, is that I'm bending my knees with my forearms on my thighs so that my torso is more upright, so that my head is not essentially below my knees. And so that was me, while like my two other friends were like crushing downward dog and doing all kinds of things, no problem. So nausea would be one of them to check out. And some women also get a little bit of vertigo. So those would be two reasons you probably wouldn't do a lot of forward folding in a standing variation. And so what I would do for downward dog is I took child's pose, or I just come onto hands and knees so that my head and my heart were on the same level.
Got it.
So it really just depends. And when you take child's pose when you're pregnant, your knees always go out to the sides. And then the bigger you get, the more your knees go out. And then in your third trimester for child's pose, you'd put a bolster or a block underneath your forehead or underneath your forearms, just so your belly's not touching the ground at all, so you're not putting any pressure on the little one. So that would be one of the first things that I would talk about. And the second thing to talk about, and this is the controversial one, is whether or not to do core work. That's a big one that comes up for pregnant people, and it depends on whether or not you were doing a lot of core work beforehand. So in the first trimester, so there was school of thought with pregnancy in general, and we have a blog post about it, as well as on the website itself. We also have on the Practice with Clara website, we have a how to modify for pregnancy. So all of that's on there too. So those of us who are maybe trying to take notes, you don't have to. We have it all for you in other places. The biggest rule of thumb with pregnancy is whatever you were doing before, you can continue doing. Don't start anything new. Okay, so a lot of people come to yoga for their first time when they're pregnant. And so for that, I'd always recommend go to prenatal yoga. Generally, prenatal yoga is a lot more gentle than like a vinyasa style, what I normally teach. And that is great and geared for people who have never done yoga before and or are not, who have never done yoga before. For those of us who have done yoga before, you can continue doing what you're doing. And that being said, you really want to be honest and truthful of, as you're doing what you normally do, does it still work for your body? And I can even say that for regular people.
Yeah.
I was like, it's more prevalent, or it's like not prevalent. It's stronger in terms of a feeling, a more visceral feeling when you're pregnant. But I also think regular people should also follow this school of thought. But so around core work, they generally say you don't want to do too intensive a core after your first trimester, meaning crunches and things like that, because you don't want to be crunching the baby. Okay, but you definitely still want to be strengthening your pelvic floor muscles, right? So the muscles that are at the base of your pelvis, you want to strengthen, you want to keep those strong, okay? Because that's really going to help with childbirth, and it's also going to help with supporting, holding the baby up as the baby gets bigger and bigger. So you definitely want to be doing core work. It's just in terms of the intensity of it's going to change. And again, you feel that out for your own body. Every woman is so different. So but generally, if you go to prenatal yoga, they won't do core or anything like that because, again, they're making an assumption that a lot of people are coming to yoga for the first time. So we want to err on the side of caution. But those of us who have been practicing for a long time, you can kind of feel it out in your own body. So that's one of the big ones. And doing a lot of back strengthening, so countering that. And I do that a lot in my prenatal yoga classes on the Practice with Clara platform, is I do a lot of back strengthening. So because as you get bigger in the front, your back needs to support you, right? And a lot of women, as the pelvis is starting to widen to prepare for childbirth, right? The lower back starts to use, a lot of women will start to feel sciatica or lower back pain because of that. So the more we can strengthen our backs, the whole thing, as well as our pelvic floor, the easier your pregnancy, birth, and then coming back to regular body, all of that is going to be really supported for you. So back strengthening would be another one. So that's what I usually offer women who come in, who are in their second trimester and third trimester, is you generally let go of like the serious kind of core work that we were doing before, and every time that's happening in the class, then you do back strengthening. So on hands and knees, lifting one leg out behind you, maybe lifting opposite arm up, right? And gently just drawing in and up. So drawing the belly gently in and up. It's not a suck, it's just a soft lift, because that'll get your TA, your transverse abdominis, to light up, as well as just a soft lift so that your back muscles will start to kind of widen and then also actually engage. So you would do things like that, and you could do opposite arm, opposite leg. So those would be things that I would recommend. Lying on the belly is the other one that you generally avoid, and you feel that out at some point in your first or second trimester. Your own body is going to tell you, like, I'm done lying on my belly. For me, it was like literally the second week I was like done lying on my belly. Like my second week when I found out I was pregnant, so I was probably like 6 or 7 weeks pregnant. The other controversial family of poses for pregnant people is back bends. And so some schools of thought feel like you shouldn't do any back bends at all when you're pregnant, just because you're essentially, as you're back bending, you're opening up the front body and you're squishing or can squish the baby. Other schools of thought say that some back bending is okay. Other schools of thought say all back bending is okay. Of course, we come back to the rule of thumb of whatever works for your body, because again, every pregnancy is so different. I come from the school of thought that mild back bends are great because it opens up the chest. If you focus more on opening up the chest and not creating a deep arc in your spine, then you generally are not creating too much compression for the baby. The other reason why we generally don't do very deep back bends is that your rectus abdominis, right, your core muscles that are in the front, known as the six pack, they separate generally when most women become pregnant, right? The bigger you get, generally they start to separate. And so deep back bending, some schools of thought believe, creates more of a separation of the core. I say feel it out for yourself. I've definitely known some women who've done deep back bends right until they were giving birth, deep back bends being like wheel pose, or for a scorpion pose, or full kapotasana, which is a very deep variation of camel. For me, my own body, deep back bends pretty much in my second trimester stopped feeling good. So I did a lot of camel, but very gentle camel, more to focus on opening up the chest. So either I take my hands to my lower back or interlace my fingers behind my head and just gently lift up that way. You feel it out for yourself. Do what, again, works so that you don't feel, if you start to feel a tug and kind of like a pull, a strong pull, then you're usually in territory that's not so great for the baby. If you're feeling that pull in your belly specifically, not in your head or your foot, I'll be more specific about that. And so, so deep back bends can feel very good. Feel it out for yourself. And then last but not least would be twists, which Steph reminded me of earlier. And so Twisting is great. You just don't want to be compressing your belly. You don't want to be squishing your belly. So when we would do like a chair prayer twist over to one side, so if I were going to twist to the right, meaning taking my left elbow to the outside of my right knee, as a pregnant woman, I would take my feet hip width apart and either put my left hand on my left knee and open my right arm up, or I would squat down and take it in Malasana variation. So twisting is great. You just want to have lots of space for your belly. In lunge, you would do an open lunge twist, which would be if my right leg was forward, the left hand on the ground, right arm up, and twisting from there. So again, twisting would be great. You'd just be creating a lot of space for your belly. Seated spinal twist, you would do the twist in the opposite direction. So again, if my right leg was crossed over my left, I would be twisting to the left instead of to the right. Reclined spinal twist, you'd put a block in between your knees and then or a bolster in between your legs, and you wouldn't take the twist as deep, so your knees would not be as close to your upper arm as they would be if you weren't pregnant. Let's see if I'm like going through the Rolodex in my head here. I think I got pretty much most things. The other thing around that is with Shavasana, there comes a point where you don't want to lie on your back, and your body will definitely tell you that. So as soon as it starts to feel uncomfortable, for some women it's in their second trimester, for some women it's in their third, then you either lie on your side with like a bolster in between your legs and one underneath your arm, or you would lie on your back but have your heart above your head. So you do like a very classic variation of a restorative Shavasana, where you'd have a bolster behind you with one block on its highest height underneath your head and one block underneath the second height or lowest height underneath your back, and then you would lie back onto that. Yeah, all of this information again is in the How to Modify for Pregnancy on the Practice with Clara platform, as well as we'll have a blog post of it. So you can definitely check all that information out. Biggest rule of thumb is take care of yourself. Yeah. And then Steph was saying that she loves doing the prenatal classes. She actually does them. And so I'd love you to share why you like doing them.
Yeah, well, it started when I was reviewing and writing up classes for you. And I'd sometimes do the classes just to feel it in my body, to get the vibe and create the content around it. But then I started enjoying them because they're a lot softer. Like if I wasn't in the mood to do a vigorous vinyasa class, there's still enough movement that you're increasing your blood flow and your breath, and you're building heat. And then it's restorative in the sense that you're building all this momentum, and then you're kind of grounding and settling, and then it comes back up again, and then it grounds. So it's good I would say, for new practitioners or for seasoned practitioners like myself, if you want to move and get your energy up and kind of build that heat, but not work so hard. So a little less effort if you're tired, if you ate. Like yes. I noticed that if I had a late dinner and I hadn't done yoga that day, the prenatal was perfect because it serves a bigger belly. Like just being real, if you don't have time.
Absolutely. And the other thing I'll say around that is it's also great if you have lower back. If you have any lower back stuff going on, a lot of the modifications for pregnancy are actually the same for people with lower back issues.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
Because it's a way to just get moving, do something different, and specifically with your classes, and you touched on it briefly, is all the back strengthening. Because I think I'm probably not alone in saying this. I don't really focus on my back. I don't go to the gym and work my back muscles. If I get it in yoga, cool. Otherwise, I don't really think about it.
Yeah.
But the prenatal does a lot of leg strengthening and back strengthening,
yes.
which everyone can benefit from anytime. And I would break a sweat sometimes. You're a little tired, you're doing these classes, why not?
Yeah, I would agree.
And the other piece, and this, I'm curious to hear you talk about it because I'd never heard of it, is the Post-Natal series. So after you're pregnant, you're calling it trimester 4. Tell me more.
So we've given birth to our babies. Yay! And then we want to start doing yoga again, but generally, depending upon how your pregnancy went and how your birth went, your body is in a state of healing that, at least for me, going to a regular vinyasa class was not in the cards. I wasn't ready. I'm starting to feel ready, and it'll be 3 months in a couple of days. I didn't feel ready to do anything vigorous until now, and so I've been creating for the last little bit trimester 4, a set of 5 classes, and that again is geared towards those of us who have just given birth, but again it actually could be for anybody as well. who wants kind of a slower class. And so what I'm specifically focusing on in these classes is kind of rebuilding the core and the pelvic floor, specifically after giving birth vaginally. And so just because everything is widened, your pelvic floor is literally widened, and your core muscles have widened from your third trimester of holding the baby. So I've been focusing on very, very small core exercises in order to start strengthening them, kind of similar to what Kegels are, similar to that, but a little bit different with a yogic bent on it. So I've been focusing on that, and then I've been focusing a lot on upper back and shoulder strengthening, because holding a baby for 6 or 8 hours a day and rocking her to sleep, my shoulders and my upper back are killing me. So I've been focusing a lot on strengthening both of those, and I actually did that also in the third trimester as well, just because of holding the baby or having the baby inside. I was starting to feel my upper back naturally rounding. So having all this, the focus is on strengthening core muscles again, and then kind of strengthening my mid to upper back to support rocking and holding a child. And then I think I've got 2 more to shoot, and I think those are going to be focused on leg strengthening and kind of finding my legs again, because I don't know about anybody else, but after giving birth, I feel like I lost some musculature in my legs just from lying down and breastfeeding seated for what feels like ever, even though it's only been a couple months. So both of those things, like my hip flexors are super tight now from sitting. So it's just been interesting. So yeah, we're creating the 4th trimester.
And this goes as well for people who sit at an office desk all day. Hip flexors, you're sitting, and this roundedness of holding baby, that's what you're doing in front of a computer.
Totally.
This is why I like these classes.
Yeah, no, good one.
Yeah. I think, and this is going to link to our next kind of theme for this chakra, is also as someone who goes to class and I want to just give her and go really hard, really deep, feel really good.
Yes.
These classes, because it's smaller, concentrated movement, tell me to rein it in.
Yes.
And I'm going to link this to our next kind of topic for discussion. In second chakra relates to pleasure. And pleasure is an interesting one because things that feel really good, and there's tons of examples here, are not always good for us. And relating it to the practice, to myself, in, going really deep into Hanuman or a full splits pose, when really I need to rein it in. And that's where the prenatal and the postnatal are good for someone like me. But let's shift it into the idea of pleasure and things not being good for us. So defining what is enough, but also in that same vein in repressing what we actually want. And that links into how we feel and giving ourselves permission to feel good about taking a nap in the middle of the day, or, I don't know, other simple pleasures that sometimes sleeping in. Those are both related to sleep. Clearly I need to sleep more.
Eating a bowl of ice cream would be one that I feel like sometimes people... or, like those kinds of pleasures that are quote unquote not as healthy for us. But I feel like sometimes it's important to indulge in those pleasures.
Totally.
Just to quite simply, one of my nutritionist friends says, like, eat 80% for health and 20% for your heart. Right? So you eat, so you eat 80% of the time, you always eat good, healthy, yummy, nutritious food, right? And then 20% of the time you eat because you love it. Right?
Yeah.
And so that way we keep with the moderation without going too far in either direction and staying healthy, but also feeding your soul. And sometimes that bowl of ice cream, which is what I feel like eating on this beautiful warm day, is a good thing to indulge in. So yeah, I agree. So there's like a fine line between indulging into our pleasures and repressing them. And
moderation is the perfect word to use in this. To use in this circumstance is what is too much? What are you doing? How much of it are you doing? Like if you eat ice cream every single day, it's no longer an indulgence. It's no longer 20%. This is now a habit, right? Same thing with your yoga practice. You want to go and just fly one of those days. I'm back bending. I'm doing all the things I love.
Yes.
Awesome. But what are you doing the other 6 days of the week?
Exactly. And so, Yeah, when working with second chakra, we work with desire, we work with pleasure, we work with what is our relationship. So a question that we would generally ask, and Anodea definitely asks it, is like, what is your relationship to pleasure, right?
Yeah.
Do you seek it? Do you shy away from it? Do you indulge it? Is there a good balance between, let's say, habit or not habit, what needs to be done, duty versus pleasure?
Yeah.
And I feel like finding the right balance is important, because you do need to feed your spirit. You do need to feed your soul. I remember the same nutritionist friend said, like, if you eat healthy 100% of the time, right, and your spirit and your soul is not fed from that, then you're actually not gaining all the nutrition that you would be gaining from that food, because your soul is not uplifted through it, which I thought was such a great concept.
Beautiful.
You're like, yeah, you could be doing all the things right, but if your heart's not in it, then what's the point?
And that goes into so for those of you who have this book or want to get this book, on page 118, she's talking about the separation of the body from the mind. So our heart and our head within the pleasure principle, and specifically so the limbic system controls your hypothalamus. And this is your heart rate, blood pressure, breathing. And it goes in contrast with the neocortex, so this cerebral cortex, which is your conscious thought process. So yoga is kind of uniting both of these areas, where you're tapping into the rhythm of the body, your breath, grounding, movement, going with the flow, and calming all the busyness, all the shoulds, all the have-tos of the mind.
Yeah.
And you're yoking these two elements. It's no longer a separation. And she talks here in specifically the West in preference for the mind over the body, whereas the East really serves the body in a lot of the philosophy. And this book, she's trying to show both halves and how they come together.
And how important it is, because if we don't have, because we are both body and mind, if they are not playing for the same team, then there's discord.
Yeah.
Right. And that's how disease and all that is kind of created, is when there's discord between different parts of our bodies, or different parts of ourselves, I should say, the body and mind. Yeah, the body should definitely be celebrated more. But mind is definitely, I feel like, uplifted, because it is like the action, it creates action, and it makes you feel like you're doing important things, where the body is just this primal, I feel like some people think it's like, dirty is not the right word, but there's like shame is not the right word either. There's something kind of along those lines of like, it's looked down upon, even though, at least for me, and it's cool watching my baby grow, right? Because I was just talking about it with my dad. I'm going to go off the subject, but I was talking about it with my dad. She's starting to talk now, and I mean talk like she's gurgling, but as we're talking, she's making sounds.
Oh my gosh, she wants to join.
Yeah. And my dad was saying, this is thousands of years of evolution that we're watching right now that's happening.
Oh, so
right?
cool.
And what a cool idea that is that, like, without us saying, like without her mind saying, like, we're going to talk now, she's naturally doing it, right? And they naturally, like, all of their reflexes happen because of evolution, and it's not because their mind told them to do it. It's something that's in the body. And so that's what I think is so cool, right? Our body, like, without me thinking about it, my body is digesting the food that I ate earlier, right? I'm naturally like, I'm breathing. If I were to get an infection, your body naturally goes to try to fight it. It's like, without you thinking about it, the body is taking care of itself, which is so cool.
And so much of what we do, we try to rationalize. Whereas you may be innately, and we kind of talked about this in our last episode, where you said, go to what lights you up, or go through what interests you, what's pulling you in. But I feel like a lot of us, and I've been this person, where you start rationalizing. What is the point of this? Is it good for me? What else could I be doing right now? How much does it cost? There are all these things that kind of start to build obstacles around what it is you want to do.
Yes.
When just go do it. Or, and I see this a lot with people, you want validation, or you want some sort of, go do it for yourself. Don't listen to someone else's story. Mess up. Maybe you'll fail, but it's the process of doing it instead of analyzing it. 100 different ways.
And so important to fail. Alejandra and I have been talking about that a lot lately. So important to fail, because it is through failure that you actually learn. Like, mistakes are such a great teacher, but we have such a strong fear around failure.
Yep. And that's conditioned.
Yes. It's unfortunate.
So I think this is the perfect way to move into Tantra, which I really wanted to talk about because it rejects the idea of dualism, and dualism being the separation of things. So like we're saying, separation of body-mind, separation of me versus other. And Tantra is a part of this chapter because it celebrates the body. It celebrates our emotions and living fully in our experiences.
Yeah, so Tantra being one of the oldest, well, it depends on who you talk to, but one of the oldest schools of philosophy from India, and went underground for a long time and has kind of come back up again. And a lot of people, when they hear Tantra, they think of the sexual practices, but just to let you know that there are many different styles of Tantra, and not all of them have to do with sexual practices. But what the biggest thing that all Tantra believes in is that there is no other, and that the divinity lives inside of us and around us. We just have to remember it. So we're not seeking it outside of ourselves. We're not looking somewhere else. It's actually already here. And we are divine beings. We always have been and we always will be. It's just like a remembrance. And so what Steph's bringing up right now is that a lot of different religions and philosophies are dualistic. And dualistic means that there's always an other. So there is black and white. Right? There's no gray. Where in Tantra it would be all gray. We're just at different shades of gray. We're just on different parts of the spectrum. And so because of that, in that school of thought, when you see another person, you see the divinity in them, you see the connection. So instead of thinking of what is different between Steph and I look at what is the same. Like, what do we share that is similar? Because that is the divinity that we share between us, right? Our consciousness.
And that would aid, just to loop this back to where we began talking, that would aid in building the relationship and the fluidity and going with the flow, is if you start seeing the commonalities between yourself and everything around you.
Mm-hmm. And celebrating the differences in the same breath.
Totally.
Yes.
But there's more space to play and that freedom to be fluid, instead of seeing it, I'm me, you're you, we're just not gonna do this together.
Right, and also to make a clear line in the sand of the differences between us. And not in a way of celebration, but in a way of you are the enemy.
Yes. And something else I love in the expression of Tantra, in you have all the answers within you. So if you're someone who loves to paint, you don't need to learn how to paint. It's there already. Do the painting. Be the painting. You don't have to go and learn. There's no seeking. It's not outside of you. It's within. And there might be a refinement process, which is why you would go to school or seek counsel from other people, but it's there already.
What do you like about that?
It shows that I like thinking that everyone has a gift waiting to be expressed and explored, and that each of us has something to give to the world and to celebrate.
And why do you like that?
Because it's like we're all looking for a treasure and then bringing it out and sharing it with each other. It's like making something to bring to a dinner with friends.
It's your way of contributing in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, and also getting to know yourself. It's that idea of know thyself and understanding what makes me love, what makes me full of fear, and kind of getting to know and unravel what it means to be an individual, but also come into the collective.
I like that.
So I thought I'd close this episode by reading one little passage out of the Tantra section in this chapter. So the word Tantra comes from the Sanskrit word root tan, meaning to stretch. Tantra literally means a web or loom. This Sanskrit term has also come to mean essence. The same root also appears in words for family and birth in Sanskrit, in tanaya, to continue a family, and tanis, of the body. So little.
And then tra means instrument. So tan means to stretch, to expand, and tra means instrument. So like mantra, manas, man means manas, the mind, and tra means instrument, so instrument of the mind. So tantra means an instrument to stretch.
And of the body.
Well, it's not of the body. It's just a stretch.
Okay.
And it's to stretch mind and body. But it's a way of the idea of Tantra is it's expansive.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And that's what the idea of the web is, which is such a cool idea.
Got you.
Yeah. Makes sense?
Yeah. And I love just because the root in family and body, like you're saying, it's this all expansive that's including everything. I love that because so many philosophies are so analytical or separate, whereas Tantra invites everything.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. As we close up the second chakra, a sweet reminder on the Practice with Clara platform, we have under the chakra section, we have a second chakra playlist, and we have classes for every day of the week. I think we actually even have more than 7 classes. So if you want to check out different ways of exploring the second chakra in terms of movement and meditation and mantra, then go ahead and you can check it out in second chakra in the playlist, in the chakra playlist. If you haven't already subscribed to the playlist, subscribe to the podcast. And thank you, Steph, always for having such great questions and for holding court with me through the podcasts. And we'll see you soon. Thank you for joining us today on the podcast. Today's podcast is brought to you by the Practice with Clara app. That's mine. I've created almost 100 yoga classes for you to do at home or on the go. And they're available to you on your favorite device, including mobile, desktop, and TV. These classes include vinyasa, slow flow, hatha, restorative, yin, mantra, meditation. I also just had a baby, so I created prenatal yoga for all 4 trimesters. So head over to clararobertsoss.com/join to learn more. Or search for the Practice with Clara app at your favorite app store. There's a 7-day free trial, so no commitment. And make sure to subscribe to the podcast. We've got lots of good stuff in store for you. Until next time, namaste.